When the words survival horror are mentioned in today's gaming society, very rarely does it actually mean survival horror. The first games that spring to mind are Dead Space and the newer Resident Evil games. However, these aren't survival horror games. Yes, whilst you are essentially surviving in a horror environment, whatever that may be, it is not what a survival horror game is. These games swap out the lack of resources, vulnerable characteristics, and truly terrifying enemies for a more Hollywood blockbuster action horror approach. You can drop enemies in a few bullets, and they rarely pose a real threat to you. That isn't what survival horror is. Survival horror is truly working to survive, conserving the resources you have, being truly vulnerable in more ways than one, and being utterly petrified of what is lurking in the shadows for you. Frictional Games and I have had a relatively short relationship. Having only picked up the Penumbra games recently, and after I had completed Amnesia already, I was dropped into the deep end on this one. After hearing such comments as the scariest game ever and don't play this alone, Amnesia: The Dark Descent was almost teasing me into buying it. I picked it up as part of the Indie Humble Bundle, which I bought for a mere £6 and got 8 games with. This was a massive saving compared to Amnesia's Steam price tag of £13. Amnesia was the first one I played out of the games, as it was the one I bought the pack for. It had very little knowledge of what I was to expect. I watched the game trailer and I knew people who had played it, but apart from that I knew nothing going into the game, which was extremely contributive to the overall experience. Amnesia begins with that old video game cliché that is even mentioned in the game's name. Your character is suffering from amnesia. After a little intro movie, which does nothing apart from explain your name and birth country, which of course is Britain. Now, in a game where you suffer from amnesia, you obviously know very little of the backstory or what is going to happen. In fact, Amnesia, the game that is, leaves you with so little knowledge of what is going on, you may as well be suffering from amnesia. One design flaw with Amnesia's story is it is all told through logs. Now, I'm never a fan of logs to tell story. I prefer it being outright explained to me or allow my imagination to create one. But not only does it have logs to tell you the story, meaning that you could potentially miss crucial information if you miss a log, but it also does it in the most boring and atmosphere detracting way possible. Text logs. These logs that have been written usually by your character before he suffered from amnesia, to tell his future self what he must do and how he came to be in his predicament. I cannot explain what these logs actually end up explaining, because, surprise surprise, I missed out on a few of these logs, which means I have massive plot holes that needed filling by myself. But what I have managed to cobble together, and feel free to correct me if I'm wrong, but your name is Daniel, and it is 1839. You are being chased by a mysterious entity named The Darkness. I suppose that's how original we're going to get nowadays. In order to destroy this darkness, you must find the owner of the castle, your friend Alexander. I will not divulge into the story anymore, as what I could cobble together was, though a bit far-fetched and cliched, but was generally very good. Amnesia was very different from any game I had ever played in terms of gameplay. The game has an extremely well-designed physics engine in it, for an indie game. The physics are used often to solve puzzles and to generally progress through the game. However, all actions are controlled by the mouse buttons. Movement is obviously mapped to the keyboard, but actions such as opening doors and interacting with objects is dealt with the mouse. This makes gameplay fluid yet fiddly. This would normally be a complaint, seeing as what the game is trying to do to you, and seeing as how well implemented it is, deserves great praise. Daniel is completely defenseless. The game has no combat mechanics, and enemies cannot die. You must run, hide, and use the darkness to your advantage to sneak around enemies and elude their range of vision. This makes the game truly frightening, with no way to defend yourself other than shutting yourself in a cupboard and hiding amongst some dead pigs really makes the game tense and a heart-pounding experience. The game's monsters themselves are scary the first few times you see them. However, using a very clever game mechanic, which I'll come to in a second, makes them less visible if you look at them. They look rather like Egyptian mummies with mouths like elites from Halo, which in the dark and at 4 in the morning can be quite frightening. Amnesia also makes you appreciate light, yet fear it at the same time. If you stand in the dark, your vision becomes blurred and your movements slower as you slowly go insane. This is never explained to my knowledge, but it leads me to think that Daniel was scared of the dark, which makes it even scarier. You can begin to hear noises, see creatures, and lose your footing in these dark areas, making the game harder and harder to play. Your sanity also drains rapidly when you look directly at a monster, making you even more vulnerable to them. Light helps focus your vision and get level footing, but it does not recharge sanity. Also, it makes you more visible to monsters. This means light must be used sparingly, or you will most likely end up dead. Light is also a limited resource, as most of it you have to create yourself, whether it be fires using tinderboxes or your trusty oil lamp. Oil is harder to come across than tinderboxes, from my experience, yet oil is more useful as it is portable and can be put out if a monster comes into your field of vision. The game doesn't look great, however it does the job. For someone who isn't overly bothered with graphics, I was pleasantly surprised by its presentation. I was also playing Amnesia on a 2-year-old laptop, of which can run the game on high settings. Sound is more important than visuals in this game, as I will later explain, but for now I'll focus on the visuals. All objects are fully 3D animated and designed. This means that each object is near enough unique. I noticed that boxes that are the same size and design had different wood patterns on them, making each object special in its own way. When you throw an object or hit another one, it kicks up dust, which gently floats back down to the ground, which is a very nice touch. Even though the game doesn't look great, it pulls it off with all the little details and the time period it's set in. The sound, however, is another matter. Whoever composed the soundtrack and made the game's sound effects is an absolute genius and worthy of an award. Subtle cues such as wood creaking in a particular fashion or a slight grumble can notify you of a monster's whereabouts. You will often hear screams of pain from others in the castle as they are taken by the darkness. You can hear wind whistling through the castle and trees blowing outside. All of the sounds are perfectly timed and ear-pleasing, not to mention excellently planned. For someone who knows about music technology, this was masterful to be able to experience. The game is much better with headphones on, as you get a truly remarkable stereo field effect, and the close proximity speakers help block out any background noise. Amnesia is by no means a perfect game. It has its flaws, such as the awful way to present the story and some bugs and glitches I encountered along the way. Not to mention clipping the scenery a few times where it's supposed to have ended. But I overlooked these issues as they were so small and insignificant to the game overall. However, I do have one big problem with Amnesia: The Dark Descent, and yet again it's to do with the story. It's the ending. Given your multiple choice ending, though you never really fully realise it, the ending I received produced no closure and no explanation as to what I had done. It simply faded to black and the credits rolled. This ruined the game's finale for me. What had been an 8-hour edge-of-my-seat, genuinely horrifying game was instantly fucked over for me when I completed it. This could have been because I genuinely didn't want the game to end, or it could have been the appalling closure that the game offered. Amnesia: The Dark Descent is a must-buy game for any survival horror fans. Note that I said survival, not action there. Any PC gamer who wants a fright on a generally reasonable budget should pick this game up without question. Someone who is looking for a great story should at least consider it, and anyone who is looking to kick some ass should definitely avoid it. Amnesia is a generally great horror game, which managed to scare me and keep me wanting to play with its originality. That's why Amnesia is such a great game.